What's up, everybody? Thanks for watching the old YouTube. This is out here testing the coil suspension upgrade for the Begode Hero. Something that I believe I'm the first to do. I know Alien Rides upgraded to a dampening air shock. I have an S18. I much enjoyed the stock suspension on that, figuring it's the same one they're putting on the Hero. However, it just does not have the capabilities, in my opinion, for off-roading that a coil shock has, especially with somebody at my weight. I'm a 225-pound rider without gear, typically don't wear any gear other than the helmet, and the coil shock, in my personal opinion, would be a definite upgrade for anybody that off-roads and wants to off-road something like the Hero. This suspension is nearly almost identical to the D&M shock, but it's a different brand. I did, however, notice on D&M you have about 15 to 18 clicks for the dampening. This one you get about 9. It is, however, a little bit better in my opinion. The rebound is crazy slow for the up travel if you put that thing to full slow. I mean, you're a good second and a half before you return to your standing position on that travel. The fast, I mean, it's instant. It's good. I have this ride on about 4 clicks from the slow. Impacts are really well, and you don't feel like you're being flung off of the shock. On this particular trail, it is very rocky, very bumpy, a lot of loose terrain. There's roots everywhere, and when I rode this a couple of times previously with the stock shock, there was several times where if those pads weren't lowered down to my feet, I probably would have bounced right off of this wheel. So having that dampening ability definitely makes it to where you feel more like a mountain goat climbing these types of hills with the Hero. This is one of my favorite trails to do out near Olympia. It is a mountain bike trail, so not for the lighthearted. There's some very narrow areas. Clearance with the pedals gets very sketchy at times. It is very steep and hard to climb, even when you feel like you're Supermaning this wheel. A lot of things jump out and get you. You'll see up here in a second that in the video it's hard to tell, but there's actually a deep divot from the bikes, and I tried to avoid that, hitting this stump. Completely hidden there in the leaves, did not see it coming. I'm glad I wasn't going any faster than I was, but stuff like that happens on trails like this. People like chance. You guys could fly through the air all you'd like with all your padding. I'd prefer to keep my body intact. Back to the suspension on this guy. The actual modification itself is probably about a half hour to 45 if you have somewhat of experience with taking these wheels apart. If you're new to the wheel, Alien Rides did provide kind of a personless breakdown, I would say, on how to get to the suspension and replace it. This particular suspension did not come with any extra bushings or shafts, so you do have to swap the ones from the original shock, which do fit really well and have free movement, which I was glad that happened. But you'd probably be at about an hour and a half for a new person with basic tools. This Begode, unlike some of the other wheels I've had, there's like 3 different size Allen wrenches to take apart the entire thing, from the pedals to the body panels to the suspension. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. I did like, however, on this wheel compared to my RST, that there is kind of a plastic spacer on the inside of the grub screw that holds that shaft that holds the pedal onto the pedal hangers in place, and it also creates a friction. So even if your Loctite does loosen, that kind of gives it that spring-like tension to help prevent those grub screws from backing out. I have Loctited RST grub screws for the pedals prior to riding this wheel, and almost every time I went to go check them, those dang things were loose. This wheel also has a grub screw in the bottom of the pedal hanger, which I believe is the first for Begode, that adjusts the tension for the pedal on how well it stays up. There's no actual cheap metal bracket like the S18 has, or the weird plastic piece that the S20 has to keep the pedal up. It is just friction off of that grub screw. This suspension, with my weight being 225, I did have to take that spanner nut and compress it quite a bit. I'm probably 2/3 of the way down the threads on this with a 650-pound spring that comes with the suspension. I would prefer a 750 coil like the one I put on my S18 just because of my weight. But the plus side to these coil suspensions is the amount of threads you have to work with the tension or preload you want on that coil. The take up when I stood on it from a stock position on those threads, I probably used 1/3 of the travel, so I definitely had to make it tighter. Some people like that squishy feeling, but for off-roading purposes, you'd be bottoming out constantly. Kind of like with the air shock that came with it. If you put the PSI to your weight, it is very dampening going off of things, but very springy when you're popping up for the travel. On this guy, since you have that ability to dampen it, you could make that coil very tight to help increase the impact and decrease the impact on the wheel when you hit bumps, roots, etc. And then you get that dampening that reduces the fast feedback of that coil going back to its original position, so you're not being popped off the pedals like you do with the stock air. If you lower the stock air suspension to a more comfortable ride, you end up bottoming it out constantly when you go off of curbs or hit big bumps or do little jumps like off of a speed bump. So I found there was really no winning with the stock air suspension, even for just your basic on-road riding. This trail, it beats the crap out of your wheel. Not something I would recommend to everybody unless you know how to perform some basic maintenance and cleaning and greasing of a wheel. It's harsh. The suspension is definitely going to be put through the ringer on this trail on a regular basis, and I think the coil's going to help absorb some of that. I did notice with the tire on this that the secondary knobs, so not the center ones, are placed a little further down than a standard knobby tire like the TR1 I really like to run, which makes the wheel very nimble. However, you could get stuck kind of at an angle because you don't have much of a flat surface to ride on. When you're street riding, sometimes it makes it a little difficult at higher speeds. When you're out here on the trails, it makes it really nice. You'll see in this video that there's a couple of times where I'm just zigging and zagging. Right here's one, for instance. I don't think I could have avoided that tree with my pedals if I was riding the S18 with the TR1. That was good pedal clearance and very good nimbility to be able to do that, and that's one thing I absolutely appreciate about this Hero. You could lean like Superman and you don't lose the agility of it, and you don't lose that confidence of feeling like you're going to face plant like you do on some other wheels. The suspension on this thing, the S18 has been my all-time favorite wheel. Having a Sherman, having an RST, this wheel, I was kind of iffy about it at first. I had that stock suspension for about a week before I put this coil on there. And once I upgraded to that coil, went off a couple of curbs, rode around the neighborhood, I was like, this is my wheel. The range is great. The power is there. It's very sleek. It's narrower than I thought it would be. The RST, I felt like I was kind of standing on a horse. My legs fell a little wide apart. Wasn't a huge fan of that. And for some reason, no matter how hard I leaned into the pads, some of these hills, I just feel like the power band was a little higher in the speed range. And on this wheel, it's just there. I was doubting this wheel was going to be able to do some of these steep hills and trails like this one here. And pretty much anything I threw at it, she went. There was a couple of times where I did end up having to stop on one of these steep hills, and I was like, no way I'm walking this wheel up this thing and getting back on. Hopped on it, Superman leaned into it, and the wheel just took off and went up the hill. S18, I don't think I would have been able to do that. However, I rarely ever stop on steep hills with the S18. A lot of people complain that that wheel isn't powerful enough, especially for heavier riders. And believe it or not, this trail in this video, I've probably done 3 or 4 times on the S18. 0 issues at all the way up, all the way back down. I believe the weight of this wheel definitely impacts the way the suspension feels, the way it reacts. On the S18, it just feels lighter, not necessarily the wheel, but just the impacts and overall riding on the rough terrain. This is a very smooth wheel. It's a very nice wheel. I would highly recommend it to anybody. I would, however, say if you're doing anything other than street riding, even if it's just basic trail riding, you know, like your normal walking trails you find at parks, the suspension would be a big suggestion to upgrade. Not a big expense. Level of difficulty is probably about a 6 or a 7 in comparison to the S18 is like a 2. You let out the air in that thing, you sit on the top of it, it exposes the top and bottom bolt. It's a quick swap. This thing, you remove the 2 side panels, you got to remove the whole upper panel, and then you have to get that suspension sagged just right to get to the upper bolt. They actually made a tiny little round cutout in the aluminum frame of it to get to that top bolt, and it is, I mean, you're talking 0.5 millimeter of clearance there. It's not much, but it's doable. It's not a bad swap, and for the rideability afterwards, it's definitely worth the upgrade. Hope you guys liked the video. Right here you can see me plowing through puddle. It rained about half this trip, and the Hero had no issues with the rain whatsoever. Enjoy, subscribe, like, comment if you'd like. You guys have a good day.